Okay, for the first problem, we're going to start with the amplitude. And to do the amplitude, we're going to look at this number, and it's going to be the absolute value of -4. So that's 4. We'll come back to the midline in a second. To find the period, that is going to be 2 pi divided by the number b for x. And since the number b for x is that 1 right there, it's going to be 2 pi divided by 1, which is 2 pi. So we make our y-axis. Make sure you make marks for your x-axis, and then we count out 1, 2, 3, 4 and put 2 pi. If you want to know what each increment is, just take that 2 that's in front of the pi and divide it by 4. So this 2 right here, that would tell us that each one is worth 1/2. So this is not necessary to do unless you're not very good with fractions. So this first one is going to be 1/2, put a pi on it. Then 1/2 plus 1/2 is going to be 2/2, which is just 1 pi. Then you have 3 pi over 2, and then you have the 2 pi. So there's a quick way to do all that, and I'm going to erase these out of here. Then what you have next is that it's a negative, so we're going to be going down for sine. So it starts on the midline, we go down to -4, midline, up to 4, midline, and we graph. So make sure those are curves, and then we can see our midline is y equals 0. This is also consistent because we're not adding or subtracting anything to the equation, and that's what will change our midline. Okay, on to the next one. We have cosine of 1/3 x. So cosine always starts either up or down. Since it's positive cosine, it's going to start up above its midline. Amplitude is the absolute value of 1. Since the number in front right there is a 1, midline we'll get back to 2 pi divided by 1/3. So if we do keep and then change and then flip, we get that this is going to be 6 pi. So y-axis, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 pi. And then we are just marking off 1 and -1 for that amplitude. Again, to figure out what each increment is worth, divide it by 4. So it's 6/4, which is 3/2. So this is 3/2 pi. But you can also see if you're at 6 and you want halfway, half of 6 is 3 pi. And then you're just looking for this one right here. So if you just take 3 and add 3/2, because that's what each spacing is worth in your calculator, you'll end up getting 9/2. So this is 9 pi over 2, which is also 4.5. And then it's going to be cosine, and it's positive, so I'm not going to start on the midline. I'm going to start up, and then we go down. Cosine likes to make a smiley face, if you notice, or a frowny face if it's negative, because it doesn't sin like sine. Just kidding. Okay, thanks. All right, number 3. We're going to do positive cosine again, so we'll have another smiley face. Oh, sorry, the midline on that guy was y equals 0. Period is 2 pi divided by the number b for x. And again, just showing you the number b for x is that guy. Sometimes it's an invisible one, but we know it's there. So this means that's pi. We didn't shift at all, so that midline is still going to be y equals 0. We make our y-axis. Make sure you label it with the amplitude. You're able to scale it if you like and count by 2s, but that sometimes messes us up, so I always like just to add an extra line. This is pi, and it's really 1 pi. So if I do 1 divided by 4, each of these increments is a 4th. So you can add those up in your calculator, and you'll see that this first one is going to be pi over 4. 1/4 plus 1/4 is 2/4, which reduces to pi over 2. Then we have 3 pi over 4, and then we have pi. Again, all that math can be done in your calculator. If fractions aren't your strong suit. And then from there, we're gonna, again, cosine is the smiley face, so it starts up high, and then it follows the same pattern as sine, it just has a different starting place. We always alternate up and down with a 0. Okay, and then for this last one, this is tangent. So for tangent, there is no midline, so you can cross that out. Amplitude is going to be 1/2, and then here's a big difference between tangent and the other two graphs right here, and that is that tangent is pi divided by b, not 2 pi, and so we need to look at the number b for x, and that's an invisible 1, so this is 2 pi, or sorry, pi over 1, which is just pi. That just tells us the period. Unlike the other ones, it doesn't really help with the graph per se. So with tangent, we all remember that it goes asymptote, and then we have the y-axis, and then a positive asymptote. And then because this is pi, and we want to go halfway, this is pi over 2, negative pi over 2. You can see that each increment is worth a fourth, but you have some going in the negative direction and some going in the positive direction. So that's why it's a little different than we did before. But each one still, like each of these is still a value of 1/4, which is this 1/4. We just have to label them differently. Let's see. Okay, and this is positive tangent. So positive tangent still uses that amplitude. So right here, if this is -1 and this is +1, I know that there's always an x-intercept right in between. But what I do also know is that it's going to go negative amplitude, then positive amplitude. So that's where that 1/2 comes into play, and then it'll coast along its asymptote. Okay, moving on. So number 5 asks us to graph, but now we're going to have a shift in there. So we have our amplitude. And then this, I'm going to remind myself to go down 1. The period is still 2 pi, and because this is cosine, it is going to include 2 pi instead of tangent, which is just pi. And that's 2 pi divided by 1, which is just 2 pi. This shift will always be your midline, so it's y equals -1. You can also graph it and see that beforehand. So tangent is the only one with asymptotes, so that's the only one where you start 2 lines in instead of just 1 line in. And that one is not negative. And then we have 2 and -2. And then I'm just going to change the color real quick. Because it's cosine, I start up, middle, down, middle, up. Those are the parent points, but now I have to move everything down 1. So just moving everything down 1. Okay. Number 6, oh, we have a reflection here. That means it's going to go down first. I also see I have a vertical shift of up 3. Amplitude is the absolute value of -1, so it's just 1. And the period is 2 pi divided by the number b for x. And again, that is going to be 1 this time. It's invisible, but it's still there. Draw my y-axis. This has an amplitude of 1 and -1. Go out 4. And then this time when I go to graph it, instead it's sine, so it starts on the midline. I'm going to go down first. And I'm only going to the amplitude. I know it says up 3, but that's a vertical shift. That doesn't pertain to the amplitude. Now I'm going to take each of those points and move them up 3. And then it looks like that. Ooh, that was terrible. That's a little better. Okay, number 7, this one has a couple of things going on. It's going to be negative cosine, so it's not going to start at 0, it's going to start below, so it's going to make the sad face. And then the amplitude, pretty straightforward, is going to be 1, and the period is 2 pi divided by the number before x. So this is actually going to be 1/2, and when I do copy dot flip, meaning I flip the second fraction, that's going to end up changing to 4 pi. And then I still have this shift of down 1. So I'm going to graph everything and then take care of the down 1. And the reason why I'm writing it is because once I've graphed the parent graph, I don't want to forget to come back, and hopefully that'll help me remember. So this is out to 4 pi. Take the number in front, and you're dividing it into 4 increments. What's 4 divided by 4? 1. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, and then tag that pi on there. This is 1, this is -1, and then again, cosine, negative cosine is going to start right there. And then I'm going to shift everything down 1. So that looks like that. Okay, for this one, we have an up 4. And then we also have that 3, which is going to come into play with the period. So amplitude, absolute value of 1, because here is where the 1 is. And that's always the amplitude. Just to be clear, the midline is y equals 4. It's not asking you that, but this is a sine graph, so it's 2 pi divided by 3. That's so annoying, but we can still do the same thing that we have done. And if you get something like this and you really can't label it, it's okay. Just get the graph without the label, so you'll get most points. So we know that all the way over here is 2/3 of pi. And because that's cut into 4 pieces, all we're doing is doing 2/3 divided by 4. You can do that in your calculator, or if you find it faster to keep change flip, you can also do this, and you get 2/12, which is 1/6. So this is 1/6, this is 1/6, this is 1/6, this is 1/6. Okay, so this is pi over 6, and 1/6 plus 1/6. Again, just do that math in your calculator. It'll tell you 1/6 plus 1/6 is 2/6, which is really 1/3. So this is pi over 3. Then you have 3 out of 6, which is reducing to 1/2, and you get pi out of 2. Again, just plug those 1/6 into your calculator. The first one, just copy. The second one, add those 2. The third one, add the next 3, and so on. I'm going to erase those so they don't get in my graph. Okay, and then next we have no reflection, and it's sine, so it starts on its midline. We're going to go like this, and then after that we're going to move every point up 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You can see that 3 of the dots are on the midline because that's how sine is. Okay. So now if we flip it over to the back side, we can look at number 9 where we have to write the equation. So we know that the easiest way to do that is to first start by identifying the midline. So the midline is what splits that graph in half, and that's at y equals 0. So c equals 0. So you don't have to include it in your equation if you don't want to, but if it makes you feel better, you can do that. The period and the amplitude. So right here, this is the amplitude. So it is 2. So that tells us that A equals 2. And then the period, students sometimes have a hard time finding, so you're always going to start here. You're going to kind of ignore this part of the graph because it's redundant, meaning it's repetitive, because that's what periodic functions do. They repeat, and you're going to start with your first one, and then then it goes up to its midline, then it goes all the way up, down back to the midline, and down. So to get those 5 points, it took until 2 pi. So I know the period is 2 pi, but I'm trying to get b so I can write my equation, and that formula is 2 pi over b. So these need to be equal. So what does b need to be in order for 2 to equal 2? And that's just 1, because 2 divided by 1 is 2. Okay? So now we can write our equation, except for we have to do one thing. We have to determine if it's positive sine, positive cosine, or negative cosine, because it's clearly not tangent. So what I notice is that sine always starts on the midline, and this is not a point that's starting on its midline. It's starting below. And so positive cosine would start above, but negative cosine is below. So we're going to be using the negative cosine. So that's going to be y equals negative, and then we have our a value, 2 cosine of 1x plus 0. So just a friendly reminder, a, b, c. That irritates me because I don't like extra things, so I would probably just write it like that. But if you wrote it that other way, that's fine. Okay. Moving on to number 10. We can see right here, this is the midline again. That lets me know that the amplitude is 3, so the midline is y equals 0. Midline, the graph has a distance of 3 from the midline, so that means that the amplitude is 3. So a equals 3, c equals 0, and the period is 2 pi divided by that b. But in our example, we have to take a look, and again, we said ignore that part of the graph. It goes midline up, midline down, midline. So right there, that means ours has a period of pi. So what we're doing is saying, this is really like 1 pi, and this is 2 pi. What does b have to be in order for me to get it to 1? Well, 2 divided by 2 would be 1. So b equals 2. And then we just use that to write our equation. Oh, and we also need to notice that this is positive sine because it starts on the midline and goes up. Negative sine starts on the midline and goes down. So 3 sine of 2x plus 0. And then again, I'm just going to clean up that plus 0 because it's not necessary. Okay, last problem. So for this one, identify the features of the graph, then write a trigonometric function using sine or cosine. Let's cross that off and write tangent. If you look on your golden ticket, it'll tell you that you actually do have to write the equation for tangent, and I don't think it was on your tangent worksheet, but it is on the review, so just make sure that you practice that. So first of all, I told you guys with tangent to draw in the asymptotes to help you with the graph. And we've already graphed the basic tangent, and negative pi over 2 and pi over 2 are the asymptotes for the standard graph. So that tells me that from negative pi over 2 to pi over 2, that's a distance of pi, because this is 1/2 and this is 1/2. So it's just going to be pi. And then the other thing that I notice is that tangent usually goes from like top to bottom like that, but this one's going, I'm sorry, yeah, bottom to top, but this one's going from top to bottom. So that tells me that it's going to be a negative tangent. And then we just need to find the amplitude because there's no vertical shifts in tangent for the scope of this class. So we have to figure out where it's hitting. And on my copy, it's hitting right here at -2 and 2. On your copy, I think it looks like it's at 3 and -3. So I'll take either one. It's more clear on the test. We actually put points on this. So the amplitude is 3. So the equation is -3 tangent of x. So again, the period is pi divided by b, and since our period of our graph is pi, b just equals 1.